Started off my service in Orlando, where I went to boot camp for 3 months, and then I went to A school and power school that took me through till till March of '91. Then from there I went to Windsor, Connecticut for a prototype, which is the hands-on training for a 6-month tour there. After that I went to Groton, Connecticut to the electric boat facility where they make submarines, so new construction submarines. I finished up, they were already underway, and I spent about 14 months in Groton, Connecticut. Then we took the boat to sea. We moved it down to Kings Bay, Georgia, and I spent the majority of my time there, except for obviously when we were at sea. We made one return trip to Groton, Connecticut for a post-shakedown, where we were in Groton, Connecticut for 4 months doing what's called a post-shakedown availability, where they go in and all the stuff that's new, you make sure it keeps working. They put some modifications in based on contract changes. And then from then on I was in and out of Kings Bay, Georgia, making patrols. I was on the Trident submarine, the Maryland, USS Maryland 738. It was a ballistic missile submarine, nuclear submarine, had the capacity to take 24 missile payloads on board, and as many torpedoes as you can fit in the torpedo room, but the primary focus was obviously the ballistic missiles. According to Jane's Navy, which is a book, it had the capacity to carry nuclear warheads on it. Well, I joined the Navy. There's a couple of things that were in play. When I was a senior in high school, I had some money that was going to be set aside through Social Security at the time, because my father had died when I was really little. So Social Security paid out a certain amount of money each month to you. And as long as you were in college, that money was going to continue to be paid to you. So that was the financial backing for me to go to college. Well, my senior year in high school, probably in the January or February, I guess it was January, when the new years, they removed that portion of the Social Security benefit. And so once you turned 18, which I already was 18, then that benefit stopped. So I lost all the financial backing that I had to go to college at that point. My parents couldn't afford to go to college. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college, so there was no real understanding of how to apply for financial aid or scholarships or anything like that. My parents, we owned our own house, which sounds great on the surface, but it was a very, it wasn't an expensive house or anything. They owned it because my dad built it on the land. So I wasn't going to be able to get financial grants, and I didn't know anything about loans, and so I'd never had any intention of going into the military. That wasn't my stick at all. And so I was working, and I was trying to figure out, this is after I graduated, I was working, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I had a friend of mine, he was going to join the military, and so we went down with him, and I kind of decided at that point I was going to. And you go in and they give you a practice ASVAB test. So he and I took it. We were both going to go in to be corpsmen, because my original intention the whole time was to go to medical school in the end. So we're going to go in and be corpsmen. So we both take the ASVAB test. He gets done and they pat him on the head and say, "Here, go sit in the corner." And then I had taken it, and I got them all right, so I'd aced it. So the guy was pretty interested in talking to me, because that obviously the higher you score on it, the more opportunities and more schools that are available to you once you're in the Navy. And so the guy said, "Hey, we got this special thing called nuclear power. If you want to sign up, it's a great thing, and you got to take these other practice tests and things like that." And I said, "Nah, I'm not really interested. I want to go 4 years, go to college while I'm in, get my school paid for, and then go on and go to medical school." So at the time I was 18, and so he said, "Well, if you just sign up for it and you complete it, we're going to give you $4,500. So 18, $4,500 at the time was like incredible amounts of money. And he said, "Then if you decide to stay in for 2 more years, you can get up to a $30,000 re-enlistment bonus." So it's eight years. I'm thinking 30,000, so right, it's all kinds of big money in my head at the time. So I said, "Well, I'll take your test, and see where I'm." And so I took the other test, and I scored really high, and they sent me to San Antonio, it's about an hour and a half from where I lived, to take the final approval test kind of thing. And so I scored fine on that. And so that's what I decided to do. so instead of a 4-year commitment, it's a 6-year commitment, but I was going to spend about a year and a half of that in school. So that was the other thing, is I wanted to get as much education out of it as I could. So my buddy went to Chicago, Illinois for his boot camp in A school, and he waited around in the snow, and then I went to sunny Orlando where they had girls in boot camp, so I was already winning to start with. So that's how I ended up in the Navy. I was a third class, which is E4, so I qualified all my watches in the engine room, and then I started qualifying the senior engine room watch, which is engineering watch supervisor. And that's usually for E6s and above that qualify that. So I was an E4, and I was working on my quals, and I was all done. And so they were like, well, he's not an usually it's E5s that they'll let stand it. Some E5s, but pretty rarely never a third class. So the captain and the chiefs and all that, they did what's called a command advancement. They once a year they can take one person and they can move them up one rank. And so they gave that to me. So I moved up to E5 or second class. Then they qualified me EWS, engineering watch supervisor, and then eventually I started standing that. So I was standing it. There was first classes and chiefs that weren't standing it. They were standing more junior watches, and I was standing EWS. And so I got to run the whole engine room, stuff like that. And then I qualified watches, and so the boat split into two pieces: the forward and the aft section. And the aft section is where all the power plant is. And back there's a room called maneuvering. And in there is where the throttleman sits. He's the one who changes the speed of the boat based on the orders given up. The reactor operator, who's controlling the reactor, and then there's an electrical board operator, and then the engineering officer of the watch. So I was done with all my quals. I was sitting there, so I qualified throttleman also, so I could get in there. And so what I ended up doing is I ended up qualifying all these watches all over the boat because I was done and I was kind of bored. And then I qualified a forward watch, which was called Lookout. So if you're ever watching like Hunt for Red October or any submarine movies, and you see the guys up in the masts as they're coming into port or going out, and you see the guy out there with binoculars, and they're all looking for boats and all this stuff. So I qualified one of those watches up there because I really hated being at sea and not seeing the sun and the stars and all, everything that life goes on. And so I figured by doing that, it'd let me get up and down. And so that's what I did, is I climbed, I qualified that, and then the chief of the boat said, "You're the guy. Anytime we surface and we go on what's called maneuvering watch, where we're coming into or out of port or we got anything going on, you're the guy that goes up in the mast and you get it." So I was like, heck yeah, man. So I was first up and last down type of thing. Got to look around and saw some, when you see the night, when you see the stars in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, it's just like nothing you've ever seen. No light noise or anything like that. It's just beautiful. So I did all that, sat there, and I kept doing patrols till the end of 1995, and my time was running out, and so I got out of the Navy at the end of, I went on terminal leave, and my contract expired in January of '96. Yeah, so when I was in school in Orlando, Desert Storm had started, so we started launching battle, or the missiles and stuff like that. So that was very much an isolated, operation, and not outside of the Navy. There were submarines that theoretically set off in the ocean, and they would shoot missiles and stuff like that from the submarines. But I was in Orlando, so I didn't really have a big piece of that. So by the time I got to my boat, it was still going on, but I was in new construction and stuff like that. So when we took the boat out, the Russians at the time were in a very financially strapped economic situation in the country. So they had, for the most part, parked all of their vessels, all their war vessels, and they weren't making any patrols, which was good because we didn't have to worry about being chased or being followed for months on end. But at the same time, it was or as it turned out to be, it was a short-term thing, because they eventually have come back to the sea, and then there's other countries that have submarines. So Joe goes to sea and he kisses his Susie on the pier, and all that shit's great. So this is actually a great story. It's a horrible story. So we go to sea, and we've got this young guy that's up forward. He works up forward, and him and his wife had not been married very long, and they bought him a trailer, in a trailer park, and they were happy and the sweetest little kids you'd ever seen, right? And we come back to port, and when you come back in, you meet your spouse or girlfriend or whatever on the pier, all the kissing and all the stuff you see in all the movies. Well, Susie wasn't at the pier, so he's like, oh, what the hell, So he tries calling her, can't get a hold of her. So we get done and we're going home, and somebody gives him a ride home, and they go to the trailer park, and his trailer's not there. Susie had put wheels back on it, and she hauled it back to Arkansas, and just left his ass there. So that was hard. I mean, that wasn't the only case. I mean, that stuff happened. So being gone and being, away, and especially with young people, young women there by themselves, it's a hard life for them, and there's a lot of crummy stories like that. So that may have been the worst. And supposedly there was a bar right there close where you could buy 50-cent beers, and some of us may have gone and imbibed those beers throughout the entire night until they couldn't walk. And we came back, and we had, so you slept in these bedpans essentially, right? And so the bed would raise up so you could put all your stuff underneath it. So we had this thing called posting. When people would leave their bedpans unlocked, you could slam their things up and you could pull the post up, and it would lock them in their bed. And supposedly imagining they were asleep during this whole period, right? So you take them and you'd rack them up and you'd post them. So we come back in one night, and it's late, it's like probably, it's after midnight, we'll say, and so we're pretty well freaking hammered, and we come in, and so it's just like in the movies, everybody's like, shh, shh, be quiet, and you're making more noise than ever trying to be quiet, right? So we go into where all the electricians were sleeping. Well, turns out this electrician, Cardenas, he had gone, and he was an electrician, he put extra electrical wiring in his bunk so he could run more shit out of his, his CD players and have extra lights and all that. So he had wired that up in his bunk, but we didn't know it. So I was going to slam him up, and another guy was going to post him, right? So I take him, and I was even stronger and bigger and better looking then than I am now. So I took him and I slammed him up, and I literally heard him thump and hit against the top and the back of the wall. Well, and when I did it, it pinched this wire. And so you could see it like sparking inside of the thing, and he's screaming. Of course, the guy's posting him, and we ran out of there and went dove in our bunks with our clothes on and pulled the sheets and just laid in bed and giggling, and he's just screaming and cussing and yelling for somebody to get him out. But of course, everybody in the room was asleep. So that was, and I mean, that's just one story of and it wasn't like we were, I love the guy. He was a great guy. He just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and didn't lock his bunk up. Otherwise, he would have been fine. So it was that kind of stuff, Joe. Just playing around and enjoying, messing around and pranking and stuff like that. And there was no shortage of that. It was always a good time. So I was 18 when I signed up. I was 19 when I joined. And so, I thought I knew a lot about life, but I didn't. I mean, I had seen a lot more than what you see today, or I mean, at least in this culture where we're at here on Signal Mountain. I mean, I grew up in the inner cities in Austin, and it was nothing, I say nothing, it was non-uncommon to see guys getting stabbed. I mean, I remember, these two girls came into the high school and stabbed this guy when I was, I guess we were freshmen then, but that was just kind of the day, and that was pretty normal. And I can remember being younger than that, living in these apartments, guys running dice games and stuff, and not having the money. And when they didn't have the money, they couldn't pay, so somebody was going to get hurt over it, and the drugs and the police conflict and stuff like that. So I was in this really, I guess you could call it now, like a gangster mentality growing up. And so when I went to the Navy, it was different, right? Because there was this hierarchy of behaviors that you had to abide by. There was a rule, and you had to follow the rule. And so that's not where I came from, so for me that was really hard. So I immediately knew that I had to adapt and change my behaviors, because violence was no longer the answer. You just couldn't do that. You had to work within the realm of the storyline, essentially. And so, you know, I became very aware of people, and that's probably one of my greatest tools that I have now, is I can read people just quickly. I mean, it doesn't take me long being around somebody, and I know where they're at, what they are, what their motives are, and things like that. And so I had to adapt to that in the Navy. And the whole human psyche piece of it, though, is in conflict and in trying times, how amazing and how strong people are. And that really comes through. That really shines through when you're in there and you're seeing, you know, this guy's wife leave him and stuff, and you're seeing these guys who are just getting pounded. I mean, working all these hours. I mean, I had a guy that, the story I was telling earlier, the guy that he and I rotated back and forth. We pulled into Port Canaveral one day, and I relieved him from watch, from shutdown shutdown watch, and he went and put all his crap in a trash bag, and he walked off the end of the boat and told the watch he was just going to throw it away, and he left Florida. He was done. He was like, you know, and so the whole piece of it, and it's funny because he and I were in the exact same situation, and his answer was to put his stuff in a trash bag and leave the state and go AWOL, and mine was just to, you know, I signed up for it and this is what I was going to do, you know, and you know, so this guy he probably eventually got kicked out of the Navy and got sent back home, so he might have had some cush life to go back to. I knew what I was going back to. I wasn't going back to the streets. The thing about it is I certainly personally struggle with us being in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I get it. I mean, I completely understand there's a lot of threats out there. I just, for me, it's hard sometimes to believe the full integrity of the politicians that have us there. When you look at the money that's tied to it, and you know, the whole Dick Cheney. I mean, go read that string. And I'm not a freaking conspiracy theory guy. I'm just saying that there's a lot of things that, if we were doing it right for the right reason, there'd be sacrifice by all of us. It wouldn't just be about those kids that are over there that are dying or coming back with post-traumatic stress syndrome and stuff like that. It wouldn't be about that, you know. And for the most part, there's two Americas going on right now. There's all of us living here and going shopping and enjoying everything and living this easy life. And then there's these kids that are halfway around the world that are doing this because a lot of them are there by situation. You know, I mean, there's a lot of, they all signed up, they all volunteered, and I'm not downplaying that at all. But a lot of times people are in those situations because of where they're from and what they have. I didn't have a clear way out when I joined the Navy. There was, for me, that was the way out. I got lucky from the standpoint that I didn't end up over in the desert getting shot at by somebody, because people were making decisions in their own best interest. So, you know, against the war, for the war, I think people really have to think about these kids are over there and they're doing what they're told to do, and that may be small and narrow-minded on their part, but they agreed to something, and they're holding up their end of the bargain. So I think regardless of your place or your position on this, you support them, because what they believe they're doing and what they are doing is they're protecting us. Like us being there or not, that's what they're doing. They're trying to take care of you. That's it.
La 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 la, wait till I get my money right. I had a dream I could buy my way to heaven. When I awoke, I spent that on a necklace. I told God I'll be back in a second. Man, it's so hard not to act reckless. To whom much is given, much is tested. Get arrested, guess until he get the message.